My name is Eric. Today I just wanted to talk about practice and kind of what is practice, what is the purpose of practice, and kind of some of the, maybe some methodologies in order to improve results and get the most out of it in terms of whatever you want to achieve. So today I was looking into it, and so I discovered a couple elements to it that I thought were very important. So everybody has an idea of perfection. So when you practice something, it's because you want to manifest an outcome, like an idea, right? Everybody has an idea of perfection. And whatever they attribute to the outside world or the inside, what thoughts are good and what's bad or whatever, there's an idea there, right? Because, we can all look around and say that certain things are perfect and certain things are not perfect, right? But we're just attributing aspects that we think to them, right? So perfection is an idea, okay, or a form. So when we're playing music or something like that, and we listen and we can hear a melody in our heads, right? Well, we have all this experience of music or all this experience of whatever. And practice, nobody would say thinking is you have to practice thinking, right? It's more like you have a tool set and then you just use it. Because you can think one thought and another, you can think of a mountain, you can think of a stream, you can think of, whatever you wanted, and there's no physical inhibition in order to stop you, right? No human physically can run 200 miles an hour, right? But, if you visualized it and closed your eyes and thought about it and visualized it, it looked like the Flash, and that's why there's comic books. But that's more of an idea and not a physical thing, right? So you can visualize and do whatever you want in terms of a visualization, but physical, there's limitations, of course, right? So now we can only do what's within our potential. Anything outside of our potential is impossible, right? So potential, we can only do as much as and actualize as much potential and as much ability as we have the potential to do so, right? It's like we can do this because we have the potential to, but we can't do this because we don't have the potential to. Okay? So potential. So practice is to develop, um, is to, so there's an aspect of practice where we try to make it effortless because nobody practices an instrument or any other thing for that matter to make it more difficult, right? To make it even more of an impediment, right? Um, and then practice also has the ability to actualize or to develop and actualize ability, so choice or power, like we talked about in maybe a last video. So develop familiarity and to actualize choice, power over it. So familiarity, what's familiarity? So familiarity is not about the physical, right? Your hand, it feels like your hand remembers what it felt like to play a major scale or whatever you wanted, but actually it's a mental thing. Because if you go to a place where you remember from childhood, you have a familiarity to it, but it's not physical, right? You have memories, you have things to compare to that you've already experienced and already have in your mind, right? So if you're familiar with something, it's a memory. It's something in the mind. It's metaphysical, right? It's not like the memory is stored in various aspects of your hand if you're playing a musical instrument. That's not true. And also, if you read the talent code, um, familiarity tends to be if certain impulses are repeated over and over again, then myelin, which is an insulator, covers those wires, right, to increase the signal and the clarity of that signal, right? So it makes it more powerful and it also increases the coherency and the power and the instantaneousness, and it doesn't take a long time to get from here to there, and that's what we call effortlessness, right? Because if you really know something, it doesn't really take that much, right? Okay, so we have effortlessness, familiarity. Familiarity is more effortlessness. Okay, so nobody practices just to practice. They always do that with an intended goal in mind, right? So you have an idea of a piece of music that you want to play, right? And then you practice in order to actualize physically, like bring about into the world that idea, right? So whenever people feel bad about, playing, it's usually they have an idea of what they should have done, but they feel like they only came up to here and didn't reach that standard, right? So they practice a bunch in order to actually meet that, right? But that idea of perfection is absolute, and physical stuff is always limited, right? Nobody in physical reality can run 130 miles an hour, but you can think of an idea like the Flash, a superhero, in a comic book and visualize it, and it's totally possible because that's the difference between physical and thought. Okay, and that's why they usually lose too. They're trying to actualize this perfection, but there's only so much you can do. Um, okay, so practice. So now that we kind of get to essence of practice, it's supposed to basically make the body not an impediment to the idea, right? Because we want to express the idea, we want to express the music, but we don't want our body to get in the way. We don't want our fingers to not be fast enough, or the execution of a specific note, or hit the wrong note, or whatever, right? So we have an idea, and then we're trying to match that physically, and we're building that familiarity. So how do we build familiarity? Well, you have familiarity with the music, with the melody in your head, right? When you listen to a bunch of songs and you have that melody in your head, now what's missing? So you have it only in the auditory sense. Now there's 5 senses, right? You have kinesthetic, you have visual, you have auditory, you have gustatory, and you have olfactory, right? Now for music, it's pretty much the big 3 where you have kinesthetic, auditory, and visual. Okay, so now instead of just one modality, and that modality is just an ethereal melody floating in the distance, right? There's no connect. It feels like it's over there, but if we practice certain steps, we can bring it closer and practice literally without our instrument. Let's literally without our instrument, but we still get the same almost results in spite of it. Now, that probably made no sense, but we'll get into that. So you just hear an ethereal melody off in the distance. Now, what if we brought it closer? What if we were able to bring it to a point where we could just get it under our fingers? Familiarity, right? Effortlessness. So, if you have a musical instrument, you pick it up. Now, we want to use the kinesthetic and auditory and visual, right? So you know what a trumpet looks like, you know what a piano looks like, you know what all these instruments look like. And whichever one you're choosing to practice, that's the one you'll visualize. So you go there, and you get a spectrum. You're trying to learn and memorize every single detail that you can, right? You're trying to really just make it an imprint in your mind, visualization. This is what so let me tell you this quick story before we continue. But Nikola Tesla he was a genius, right? He made, pretty much invented alternating current and was able to work with James Proteus Steinmetz and manifest basically our way of life, okay? So this pretty big deal, pretty heavy cat. So he had scarlet fever. Now, he had it pretty bad. When you get sick sometimes you start seeing things. Yeah, he had it real bad, okay? He would start seeing and visualizing things that were basically hallucinating, right? He was hallucinating. But after he recovered from the disease, he still had that capability to kind of hallucinate. But it was actually a more developed sense, at that time, it was more developed sense of visualization. And so he used that in order to build machines and inventions and conduct experiments in his mind. Basically, it was a 3D modeling machine in his mind. And when he had it just perfect, because it was basically in harmony with all nature's laws, it was basically, perfectly matched reality. And so he was able to build these things in his mind. Then, once he knew he had it right, go out, get the materials together, put it all together, and it'd work exactly like you wanted to, right? And that's just visualization. Okay, that's just using here, and I don't even know if that was he only used that or whatever different. But now we're trying to make it all in the modalities, right? We're trying to put it in visual, like Tesla, um, kinesthetic, and auditory. So we already have the auditory. We know what the instrument looks like. Now, can we also visualize what our fingers would look like if we played the note, right? If you played an F sharp, can you visualize what that would look like? Yeah. So you practice that. You practice with all the notes on the left hand or the right hand or on the trumpet or on the saxophone, and you're trying to visualize what that would look like if you were watching a movie. Perfect. We got the visual. Audio, you can just listen to your favorite recording and try to just remember the sound, take it off, and when you sit in a silent room, you're trying to remember that soloist, right? Imagine listening to a famous recording over and over and over and over. Let's just say John Coltrane or something like that, and then you take it off and you try to sit there and try to reproduce the solo in your head, right? You're trying to really hear it, like the tonality, the way he plays, and everything else. Okay, and then you'll develop that because that's a skill to develop that, to make it more familiar, to bring it closer. Okay, because we don't want it over here, we want it here, right? So now we got the auditory method of practicing. Now the kinesthetic. This is going to be kind of weird, but imagine you have your instrument. You pick up your instrument, like I have my trumpet here. You pick up your instrument. Now the whole key to this is detail, right? So you pick it up, you're trying to gauge the weight, how you hold it, right? You're trying to gauge the weight, how you hold it. You take your other hand, you're trying to remember how it feels to play it, to actually physically play it, okay? You're trying to remember how it feels. You're like, okay, take your hand off of it, you're trying to reproduce. Maybe hearing the clicks and the sounds that the instrument causes when you actually play it. So cool. You get the weight. Maybe you visualize actually blowing some air through it. What does that feel like? So you're trying to make these mental models in your head so that you get an accurate read on reality in your mind so that you can basically use your mind in a coherent fashion and build familiarity without actually touching this thing, right? Which is key because then you can practice as long as you want without getting tired and never having to worry about, waking up the neighbors. And then you put the instrument down. Now you're reproducing the weight, you're reproducing how it feels to hold on to it, how the airflow feels, right? And then you plug in all these aspects together. So you're not just visualizing how it feels, you're also visualizing the look of the instrument, you're also visualizing the way it sounds when you play it, and maybe when you listen to other recordings of other people, you can reproduce and visualize how they look when they're playing. If they're moving, or if, how their fingers are, if you're a saxophone player, you're trying to visualize how their fingers are moving, or if you're, like the weight of the instrument or how they're holding it. You're trying to fill in all these gaps. And so when you do that, you don't just get the modality of, oh, I'm listening. You get the modality, I'm feeling the player play the instrument. I'm seeing them play the instrument. I'm seeing all the various intricate details of how their hands are moving, and I'm also basically in their shoes. This is what it means to place yourself in another person's shoes. If you can do this effectively, then you can basically take, really get to the essence and really get to feeling the music. Because I know we've all been to master classes where the um, the person who's talking tells you, man, it's all about getting the feel and the groove and everything else. And everybody's like, yeah, what does that mean? Like, nobody knows what that means because the only person that knows is them. And since it's a feeling, it can't really be communicated since it's not, uh, verbal. It's not audio, right? It's a. So you have to learn how to visualize and reproduce it for yourself and then try to match that with them so that you can get, because how you build value, right? First of all, you go to your mentors, the people that you really highly admire and respect, and then you emulate them, right? So it's the apprenticeship phase. And then once you emulate enough people and you kind of have a decent way to value and judge things, then you can start doing your own, which is the journeyman phase, right? This is all in the book Mastery by Robert Greene, right? The journeyman phase where you're exploring, you're innovating, you're trying to find stuff, and then the mastery phase. Now, the mastery phase continues on forever, right? But those steps are there always, right? You're always exploring. You're trying to get, as much, you're trying to learn how to judge what's good, what's bad, and then model, and then you start developing preferences, and that's where that comes from, right? So then, imagine you have that melody, and then you can translate it in all those modalities, kinesthetic, audio, and visual, all of those right in front of you, and you can feel how that feels on your instrument. Then when you pick it up, the only thing that's stopping you is the physical. Now that's easy to train, right? You can just do a whole bunch of exercises, and that gives you a reason to practice, right? Because I know, people are like, oh yeah, you got to really practice. And then you're like, yeah, and then you go in the practice room and you really don't want to. Well, if you had a reason to, the why there, and people say, oh, get a good why, and then it's like, well, what why is that? And then they're like, well, you should figure that out. And it's like, how do I figure that out? I don't know, that's up to you. Just a bunch of circular things, right? But if it feels like it's within you, right, like it's a part of you, then you'll want to actualize it, right? So the closer you get the music to you, to your sense of self, right, the more likely it is that you'll pick up the instrument every day and you'll prioritize better what to practice. Or you'll hear melodies that you want to write down and transcribe and do all that stuff. So, yeah. So those are some modalities that you can practice. Now, let's get into the effortlessness. Now, so how do you know when you're struggling and when you're doing it effortlessly? Because nobody practices to make it more difficult, okay? So this is what you do. You have the visualization, or you have the trumpet. And so if you're practicing a hard line, right, you have it. Now, before you move on to the next note, you try to feel and visualize in everything that we practice, everything that we learned, on the next note. And then you try to visualize before you play it. You visualize and hear it before you play it. Boom. Visualize and hear it before you play it. And then next one. And then you do that over and over and over and over. Now, that can get kind of boring because then you'll realize how slow you have to go. Now, slowness reduces difficulty, right? Well, what you want to do is, so you have, imagine if it's a gradient circle. You have a circle where you have everything in your competency. You can do whatever you want, right? Total control, total power. Then it goes and gets grayer and black as the time goes out into the unfamiliar, right? But it's all within your potential and you can all actualize that. So what you want is just enough to be effortless, and then it's just right there, right? It's just right on the edge, right? That razor's edge of difficulty and effortlessness. Okay, so if you're playing something, if something takes a lot of effort, you're going to get tired, right? So that'll also inhibit how many hours you can practice. If you're practicing something really hard and you're just, it's too much, okay? So it's right on the edge of effortlessness and difficulty. Now, how do I know what's difficult and what's easy? Well, here's some things I should. if you hear the thought, okay, let me just get past this one rep and I'll be safe. You're not comfortable with it. If you feel like imagine you're running and you feel like your feet can't keep up with you, but you're still somehow holding on to it, that's way too hard. Okay? That's way too hard. Because that won't get you into that zone, that character. And if you read Effortless Mastery, you can do meditations outside of the music or outside of practice, but you can also do them inside of it. And if you do the meditations inside of it, where you're just there, you're 100% coherent and focused on what you're doing. The thing is that you're probably not going to be distracted by anything else. You're probably not going to run into frustration. Right? If you're getting frustrated, you're like, man, music sucks. If you say music sucks, what you're doing is way too hard. Right? No, but I should be able to play this. I should be able to solo. I'm a professional musician on this. Yeah, it's way too hard. It's way too hard. You know, you're not operating at optimal level, right? You can practice something that's way too hard and get it, but I think you want to invest time into getting good faster and having a greater return on investment and a greater mastery of what you're doing. So that when you come back 10, 20, 30 years, you recognize what you played before and it's just as good as when you left it. You know, maybe even more if you know, because some of these things, you know, bleed together like spider webs. You know, knowledge and memory don't often like memory doesn't operate on a linear fashion. It operates more like a web. Okay, and the more connected and the more intertwined all your knowledge and skills and everything else is, right? Information, the better chance that you're going to remember it, right? If you have memories, if you have one particular bit of information and you connect it to this memory, this emotion, this thing, this random object over here, this other bit of information, this, you can recover that piece of information by recalling any one of those things that it's connected to. And that's how people can memorize huge amounts of data and information, even though their working memory is only 7. Plus or minus 2. They can only remember working memory 7 things at a time. But they connect it with all these different data points in order to make a system where they can just recognize all these different storylines and then follow it visually or whatever modality they want into remembering 10, 20, 100, 200, 300 digits of information. Yeah, so if you have any sort of strain, if you feel like, am I being strained right now? Am I being tired? Or am I doing this effortlessly? Chances are, if you're asking that question, it's too hard, right? Am I struggling right now? Am I struggling like that? Like, I don't know for sure. You're struggling, okay? And struggling is not bad because that means that you're right at that point and you just need to back it up in order to get more efficiency. Now, people don't operate on the realm of efficiency, they operate on the realm of emotions. So the emotions that most are conducive to practicing is peacefulness, excitement, and projection of like happiness in terms of projecting the valued outcome. So imagine if I was so excited to get this John Coltrane solo under my fingers, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna be so killing if I can do this. And then you're like so fired up to get every single note. Chances are you're gonna get that John Coltrane solo a lot faster than if you're just like, oh, can't believe my teacher assigned me this solo. Everybody's done this, right? That's totally different, right? It's that visualization and projection of value that the practicing is manifesting, right? Nobody practices for no reason. We've already said that. So what you're manifesting, the form that you're manifesting, if you know, on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of good, and that's kind of arbitrary, but we'll roll with it. If it's a 10 and you love it, and you want this to become a part of you for the rest of your life because you love making music and giving it to others, chances are you're gonna put in the time and the work and the effort, and you're gonna somehow lose your watch, and you're gonna end up spending 10 hours in the practice room and then thinking about it all night because you love it so much. And that's why there's great musicians that love music who are really good and they can spend so much time in the practice room that, you know, and some days they don't want to because that value, that I am statement, right? This thing is me. I love it, is not there. Okay, so if you can find that, like oh man, I'd be so, this would be so cool for me if I could play it, man. I could see myself playing it. I love it. You know, I want that to be an aspect of me. You know, I want that to be a part of me. And if you can do that, you'll be cooking with fire, right? So I'd love to hear your comments below. Any other suggestions that you have in terms of, what you've been doing. I'd love to hear about it, and I'm sure other people in the comments would love to hear about it. So looking forward to hearing to it. So see ya.